Hi everyone, welcome to the TriEssence martial art channel. And by everyone, this time I'm referring to all my Patreon supporters because this will be an exclusive video for my Patreon supporters to show my appreciation for all your support. Now I've been asked by more than one or two of my supporters to elaborate a bit more on the Wuji stance that I've talked about in my last episode on Fact or Fiction, which covered my Taiji Grandmaster Xu Ming. Now in the video I talk about how in my lineage of Taiji we heavily emphasize on the training of Wuji stance. All the students, myself included, are required to do Wuji stance for years and years before they are permitted to move on to the form. And of course, even when some of my Taiji elder brothers are doing form, they still are required to do at least 2 hours of Wuji stance before they start training the form. So if they only have 2 hours today to practice, they would basically just do the Wuji stance and skip the form. So that is how important Wuji stance is within my lineage. But like I've also stressed in the video, that this is by no means the only way you can train Taiji. This is just our lineage's approach. There's more than one way to train that will get you to the end result. It's just that different people have different approaches. Some people think doing Wuji stance, like us, we believe doing Wuji stance is the most optimal way, but there are also people who find doing the form more optimal. So it's probably different from individual to individual. Now, as long as you are bit to the 10 principles of Taiji, you understand what is separation of yin and yang, and all of that, then you are doing Taiji. So it's not only people who does Wuji stance are doing Taiji, it's not that only people who does the form is doing Taiji. Taiji is not measured by form, how many steps, or even what stance you do. It's measured by the 10 principles. And further than that, it's measured by whether you can align your ability or your outcome, your result, to Wang Zongyue's Taiji Classic, right? If you can recreate what is mentioned in the Wang Zongyue's Taiji Classic, then you are in line with Taiji. If you can't reproduce those results, then either you haven't done enough training or you are not doing Taiji. So that's very important to remember, because in today's society there are a lot of people who are doing Taiji like an external martial art. Like for example, I've seen people who does Taiji form with dumbbells or weights, and there are people who do push-ups and sit-ups and other muscle training as a supplement. Now I'm not saying push-ups and sit-ups is not good, but I mean you can do them to stay in shape, to stay fit, all of that, but they do not really contribute to the training of Taiji. So if you are doing things like that, then it's better to just do an external martial art. It's no point doing Taiji, because Taiji is based on a whole different set of training. So with that said, today we're gonna just briefly explain how in my lineage we practice Wuji stance. Now, before I do that, I need to stress again that this is not an instructional video. Okay, I always stress this in my videos when it's practical, but I gotta stress this again. So if you've never done Wuji stance, you've never done the stuff we do, if you're not from our lineage, then there's no way I can teach you how to train over a video. Okay, you have to realize that when I first went to my master and everyone else in my lineage, okay, it takes at least 3 to 4 months before you can even be certain that you are standing correctly, and it takes a year up to 3 years to actually know what you are training when you're doing Wuji stance. You finally, it makes sense. The first year for me, it didn't make sense. It took about 2.5 years for Wuji stance to actually make sense to me. Before that, I've been doing the stance purely on a leap of faith. I don't actually know what I'm doing. I don't know if it's going to show results. I don't know what I'm actually looking for. That was actually the most painful process in the whole training, when you don't know what you're doing. You're not sure if doing this is actually helping. You don't feel the progress. So that happens for quite some time before Wuji stance actually makes sense. And when it first makes sense, okay, obviously, when I was first doing it for a couple of weeks, my master will come and test on me, and he will be able to know if I'm doing it correctly or not. and give me feedback. But for myself, I can't tell. I don't know if I'm doing correctly, I'm doing incorrectly. Sometimes I'm standing there thinking, I'm doing just like my master instructed me. He tests me and he said, no, it's completely wrong. And I don't know why. Like, why am I doing wrong? I did exactly what he told me to do 40 minutes ago. And 40 minutes ago he says right, now it's wrong. It's a very confusing process. So when I say you don't feel any progress, I mean you don't feel any progress in yourself, right? Your master can track your progress, because another thing that is a common trap is that a fake master will tell you just do this training. Eventually one day it will just magically click. That's actually most likely fake, right? If you are training and not getting any progress for, let's say, a year or 2 years or even 3 years, then chances are you are wasting time. Okay, I've talked about this in my past videos, very long ago, in one of my very old videos. So there are definitely progress when you train. If you don't feel any progress in like 3 months to a year, Tai Chi is the slowest one out of the lot, right? Xing Yi is faster, Ba Gua is also faster, Yi Quan is faster, Wu Xing Tong Bei is faster. Tai Chi is the slowest. But even for Tai Chi, after a couple of months, there are progress. It's just that in this case, the progress is not something that you can feel independently. You need your master to reaffirm you that you're making progress. And this is why Tai Chi is so much harder than other internal martial arts, because it's more susceptible to fraud. I mean, you're not feeling it, your master can say, yes, you are doing this right, you are progressing, but it could be in the meantime you're not getting anywhere. So it is a little bit harder to know what you are doing in Tai Chi. You have to sort of trust your master blindly for quite some time before you can feel the actual progress within yourself, independent of your master's testing and feedback. Which is why Tai Chi, in my opinion, is the hardest of the internal martial art to actually pick up and do, and the one that you are more likely to be frauded by fake masters than other internal martial art. But of course, in today's world, Xing Yi, I've seen a lot of fake Xing Yi people, a lot of fake Ba Gua people, there's even fake Yi Quan people, although it's a bit less than the rest. And so, yes, unfortunately, if you are in today's world and you're trying to learn Chinese martial art, even external martial arts, there are a lot of fake people. So it's just something that you cannot avoid completely. But Tai Chi is actually still harder to tell than other martial arts. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that I can't teach you how to do this over a video. Okay, and that's because our language, no matter what language, was English, Chinese, whatever language, doesn't matter. As long as it's a human language, it is restricted and it is not precise. Okay, some of you might think, no, but language is precise, we communicate with it all the time. Now, I don't have time to go through the entire discourse of Derrida, right? He's the guy who invented the philosophy of deconstruction. If you're interested, you can look him up, look up deconstruction, and this will make more sense. But in a nutshell, according to Derrida, which I agree with him, right? It's not just according to him, I believe it is the truth that our language is limited. What I say could mean one thing in my head, but when you hear the same phrase, it means something else. And it's impossible for me to communicate exactly what I mean in my heart or in my mind directly to you. And I can't even know if you interpreted my words exactly the way I intended to be. So when I say something and you think it, and you say, okay, I got it, it makes sense, we don't actually know if you are thinking the exactly same thing as I'm thinking. Now, of course, when there is a physical reference, like this is an apple, then we can both agree that this is an apple and it's a physical object. But with martial art training, it's different. So, like when I say you got to do this, just right, not too hard, not too soft. And what is not too hard, what's not too soft? What degree is it? Is it 40%, 50%? And even if I say, okay, it's 40%, but your 50% might be different to my 40%. So it's impossible to give a precise description on the requirement of the training, which is why it is impossible to teach this kind of training over a video, okay? And that's what I was saying, right? It takes us months and months of training with my master. And when I first started in 2008, I go there every day. At that time, he was still relatively younger and more energetic, so he goes to the park every day, we train every day, and he check on us every day. And only then, gradually, it starts to make sense. And we get corrected every day, right? We make mistakes, we get corrected. Make mistakes, we get corrected. And eventually, we're able to understand what is correct and what is incorrect. And eventually, we're able to check ourselves to avoid those mistakes. But obviously, through a video, I can't check you. So you might think you understand what I'm saying, and you might think you're doing correctly, but you could be doing completely wrong. So that is why you can't really teach this over, well, you can't really teach internal martial art over video. I would even say it's pretty hard to teach external martial art over a video because, the angle of the hand, I've taught many students in the past, and even when in front, I'm doing this, I'm saying, the elbow checks in here, the hand is at this level, they could still be doing it wrong. And for internal martial art, it's even harder because you don't even see the motion clearly. Internal martial art is not defined by a motion, right? It's not a punch that's just from here punch it out, or like in Wing Chun, tan shou is just a hand out here, the elbow down. There's exact measurement angles, but bang shou there are angles that you can measure. Internal martial art, especially Wuji stance, there's no angle to measure, which is why it is impossible to teach. And I'm making this video just to satisfy your curiosity. So you might be wondering what Wuji stance is all about, why we spend so much time on it. So this is more for that purpose than to teach you. Obviously, I can't stop you from watching this video and then going to try to attempt this on your own. I can't stop you from doing that. But I just need to warn you that it's not gonna end well. Okay, either you're just gonna waste a lot of time and have no result, or you might even do it wrong and form bad habits. So I highly recommend you to not do that, okay? But obviously, if you want to do that, it's your freedom and I can't control you. But I have to make this disclaimer that I don't recommend you to try to copy what I'm saying in this video. This is purely for curiosity's sake, or maybe understanding's sake. Like on my other videos as well, so that when you do meet a master one day, you are more equipped with the knowledge to understand what to expect, and and you are able to tell if the master is a fraud. So it's more for that purpose than actually teaching you how to do this exercise. So Wuji stance, like everything else in Tai Chi, is measured by the 10 principles. Okay, that's the guideline and the measurement we use for anything that's related to Tai Chi. Now, some of those principles are more abstract and harder, and you can't really see. We're gonna first go through the one that you can see. Okay. So obviously, when we practice, we start from the bottom upwards. But in Yang Chengfu's book, he took from the top downwards. So I don't know why he took from the top downwards. Maybe it's just easier to put in the order of things. But when we practice, we go from bottom upwards because that's where the force originates. So the feet, which you can't see on camera, unfortunately, due to the space in this room, is parallel, alright? And so you don't stand like this, you don't stand like that, it's parallel, and it's about shoulder width. You don't stand wider than your shoulder, you don't stand narrower than your shoulder, it's on the same line. So this is basically, in modern context, Wuji stance is basically when you start to do a form, you bend your knees, you lift your foot, you do this, and your hand rise up. Before your hand rise up, this is called Wuji stance. It's called Wuji Shi. Right? Wuji Shi is basically the Wuji pose, and then you start doing your form. But when you take this pose individually and spend a lot of time at it, it becomes Wuji Zhuang, which is Wuji stance. So this is where this posture comes from. But obviously, like I said, the original Yang family, they don't spend hours and hours doing this stance. This is something that my grandmaster Shi Ming has sort of invented on his own, or he basically put this idea together. The training is not unique, but this method of training is unique to him. Alright, so the feet are shoulderwards, and obviously your knees are slightly bent, and then we come to the key part, which is the hips, right, and the waist. So in in Yang Chengfu's text, he says it's called 松腰坐胯. 松腰means to relax the waist, 做胯 means to sit the hip, right? That's what you will translate it to literally from Chinese to English. But in my lineage, it's the same principle. We use different words for better description, right? We call it bulging of the waist because relaxing the waist, often people misinterpret it as just, your waist just kind of relax, but that's not the case. Your waist actually bulge. The reason it's called relax is because that kind of mentality, understanding, think that if you hold up your waist like this, that's upright. So when you're doing the inverse of upright, you're relaxing your waist. But it becomes a little confusing because in modern day, people think relax is like relax. It's just like relax, but it's actually not. Your waist is not relaxed. It's just an opposite of what holding your waist up is like. That's why it's called relax. It's a little confusing in the wording. And now I've already talked about this in my video on the 4 fundamental forces of internal. In fact, you'll find most of these things already covered there. So there's nothing new here. Unfortunately, I don't think you can see very well because I'm wearing a thick jersey. But it's kind of cold here. It's still winter. We're in the southern hemisphere. It's still winter. So yeah, I can't really take off my jersey. But if you look at my video on the 4 fundamental principles, forces of internal, I've talked about it, right? Your waist are conventionally up here, but you want the waist to bulge back. So if you look at this is the normal waist. It's like a curve. When you're doing Wuji stance, you basically flatten that curve. Okay, so that is called we call it 骨腰, bulging of the waist. And we say instead of saying 坐胯, which again can be misinterpreted as in just sitting the hip, like you sit on something. We call it 骨腰松胯. Okay, so 松 means to relax the hips. So what that entails is the hip relax and expand. So instead of holding up like this, it goes outwards. And I've covered this also in the 4 fundamental forces as well as the Patreon exclusive video on opening of the hip. So again, it's been covered already. So when you are bulging your waist, you also need to relax your hip. And obviously your hip don't open initially, it takes training. Okay. If you only hoping to open your hips from doing Wuji stance, it takes a very long time, over a year, I would say. So there are other supplement exercises that we do to speed up that process. So Wuji stance is like it's basically a checkpoint where you take all the aspects, put them together into one, and try to see if everything fits together, right? So there are separate ways to, for example, opening the hip, opening the shoulders, etc. So yeah, so basically, let's say you're only doing Wuji stance, and eventually you reach a point where you have to relax your hips. That's why we say relax instead of sit, because if you just sit and your hip are not relaxed, you can stand here forever. You can stand like that to kingdom come. Your hip's not going to open. For your hip to open, you have to relax. And this relax is again a very confusing term, like everything else, because like what is relax? How much do I relax? And if you just think about, okay, I'm gonna just relax, I'm sitting on my sofa watching TV, that's not good enough. Okay, what happens then is your hips are just not using force, but they're not expanding. So you have to sort of have a relaxed and expansion idea in your head, what we call E, right? Which I talk about in the video on the metaphysics of internal, right? You have to expand the hip, but you can't physically push your hip open because then the hips will tense. You see, that's where it gets very complicated and hard to explain. So your hip can't not move, but they cannot become tense. So that is why it is very hard to explain with words or try to watch us through a video. Because the degree of how much expansion and how much relaxation can only be confirmed when someone who's already done this practice and reached the goal come and touch you on the hips and to test you. Okay, so that's what my master does. Basically, we would just stand there and then he will come and he will check the hips and he will say, you're not relaxing enough, you're too tense, or he will say your hip is not expanding enough. So they have to keep telling you what you're not doing right, and you have to constantly make adjustments to stay on the correct point. And only when you stay on the correct point long enough will there actually be results. Okay, which is why this is very hard to try even with a master's presence. Never mind trying to do this on your own, which is near impossible. Okay, so once the waist is bulged, the hip is expanded, then it comes up to the body. The body obviously needs to up straight, right? In Chinese we call it 中正安舒. You have to be in the middle and upright. And from there we go to the next principle, which is 含胸拔背. 含胸 means to hollow the chest or to concave the chest. 拔背 means to pull the back. Now, common misconception that when you pull the back, you pull it like 拔 is like going up, right? That's what usually the Chinese term 拔 means, is to pull something up. But in my lineage, we actually believe that 拔背 is a horizontal expansion, it's not a vertical expansion. So instead of, well, you know, it's hard to see the difference, but yeah, just imagine instead of your back going back and just pulling up like this, it's actually going horizontally. Okay, that is what we understand as 拔背. So basically, if you're only going upwards there's no wrong, you're doing that, but we just don't put this under 拔背, okay? Because if you're only putting upwards and not horizontally, your shoulder blades will never open. Now, I've talked about shoulder blades in my previous videos as well, so I'm not going to go into detail here. But just know that if you only 拔背up and downwards, it does not involve the shoulder blade and they will never open. So about 含胸, right? So normally if you look at the chest, it's like, you know, it sticks out. The shoulder line kind of goes behind the chest. So the shoulder line runs here, the chest is in front. You basically have to flatten it so that, but obviously you can't just move your shoulder forward, right? This is noted. So instead of trying to move your shoulder forward, you basically try to move your chest back in relative term to your spine, right? So shoulder moving forward is moving the shoulder relatively to your spine, but instead you want to push the chest back in relative to the spine. So of course, the distance between the chest and the shoulder shift, but you want to shift that by moving the chest but not moving the shoulder. And so your chest curves back, and then your back expands outwards. Again, you can't see this, but you can feel it when you touch the back, which is why, again, you need to have first-hand experience to know what I'm talking about here. So this is purely for curiosity's sake. So that is 含胸拔背, going sideways. And then from there, we go to 虚灵顶劲, right? So 虚灵顶劲is referring to the head. And the way that we talk about it is that you basically tuck your chin in, and you pull from the spine through the neck to the tip of your head. So this whole line pulls up. So this is the vertical extension that I was just talking about. 含胸拔背 refers to the horizontal extension, and this refers to the vertical extension. Now, over here I need to just mention that my neck and head is not a very good example, because I spent decades working in front of a computer. And you know, as all people working in front of a computer, we have problems with our necks. So especially when we work for hours and hours, start to get tired, and you kind of, you know, your head kind of drops forward. So my neck is not a good example of 虚灵顶. Okay, ideally you want the spine to the neck to the head to be as straight as possible. But in my case, my skeleton when I was younger is already kind of grown to go forward. So don't take my example as a good example of this. However, even for people who has problem with the neck not aligning directly upwards, you still need to have that force pulling up. So this is partially about your physical anatomy, your skeletal structure. It's also partially about a force that you are trying to get. So even when your neck is not directly straight like mine, you can still get that force. But obviously, ideally, you want it to be as straight as possible, and through training, you know, you can gradually shift that a little bit. But even when you can't, right, you still need that force. So what's important is that when you normally talk about 含胸拔背, a lot of time people, they put their chest in, they bulge their back, and then they drop like this. Especially when we talk about bulging your waist, right? Then it kind of makes people want to become a hunchback, and then the head goes like this, and that is a big problem. It's a big no-no. So the important thing here is when you're doing a Wuji stance, you basically stand upright, right, with your waist bent, upright, chest sticking out, and you kind of have to measure where your shoulder and your head is at. And when you make the adjustment, you have to check that you are still more or less on the same level. You're not dropping the frame. Okay, so wherever your head is at originally, where your shoulder is at originally, they're still on the same height, except now the chest is concave in, the head is pushing up, the waist is bulging back. But your overall frame remains the same. And over here, there's a force that actually pulls up. Now that's something I can't show you on video, I can't explain to you precisely with words. But through training, you're not actually forcefully, trying to push your head up. When you do that, you are tensing your neck, you're tensing the skeleton, and you're blocking the blood flow, which is what Qi is. So you're basically not doing it correctly. But if you don't go up, your head will just tilt down, and that's very, very bad, right? When you see people doing Tai Chi like this, that's, when I see people do Tai Chi like that, it actually makes me very uncomfortable, because I'm being conditioned to avoid that kind of posturing. Actually, the moment I see something like that, I feel very uncomfortable inside. So the reason for that is because it's a very bad thing. It's like one of the worst things you can do when it comes to internal martial arts is to have your head dangling like this, whether it's Tai Chi or Xing Yi or Bagua, whatever you do, if head is like this, it is very bad. Because you're missing the up and down force, right? You can't only have a downwards force and not an upwards force. So your spine has to be pulling from the top towards the top and towards the bottom. So over here is actually one of the principles that isn't included in the 10 principle. Well, it's not mentioned, but it's there in more like a hidden context, is that when your head is pulling up, 虚灵顶进, your tailbone has to tuck down. So it's not explicitly mentioned, but it is there. And through doing this stance for a sufficient period of time, then gradually you actually feel naturally there's a force that pushes your head up. So you don't physically go up with that, you just simply relax, hold your thought or yi, right, your intent above your head, and naturally your head will try to reach up. And ultimately, like I said, we're after a force that is pulling up. We're not purely after the physical posturing. So posturing is important, but finding the force is even more important that goes up. And I can't explain to you exactly how it is. When we training, just like I've said, my master will come, he will put his hand over here and see over here on the neck, and he will see if you have this force that's going up before it becomes visible enough that you can feel it and know that whether you are connected from the hip, tailbone, waist, spine, upwards, right? Whether this whole thing is connected or not, he will first test it, and then after a while, then you eventually will be able to feel it too. And then once you feel it, you can pretty much stay like this without feeling tiring. If you don't, like if you're just holding your neck up with physical force, then after a while you feel stiff and lack of blood flow and all kind of pain. But if you do it correctly, basically all the muscles and the stuff are relaxed, you are held up by a different type of force, shall I say. And then you can do this for 2 hours without. It will get tired, don't get me wrong, doing stuff for 2 hours is tiring, but you don't get tired from muscle fatigue or tension. It's another type of fatigue that you get. So that's 虚灵顶进. And then we go to 沉肩坠肘. So after we fix the center from the bottom upwards, then we go to the side. 松肩 is basically relaxing the shoulder. And again, we've already expanded the shoulder blade from 含胸拔背, right, the chest and the back. So all we need to do now is to hold the head up, and when the head holds up, a natural thing for people to do is for the shoulder to go up too, right? That is something that a lot of people do when they are not trained. So which is why after you held your head up, then we fix the shoulder. We try to check if the shoulder is going up, and if it is, we just drop it down. So there's nothing major here. It's just to make sure that your shoulder isn't going with your head upwards unconsciously. So it's almost an opposing force. Your head goes up, your shoulder goes down. And 坠肘 is basically, so your shoulder sinks and comes to the elbow sinks as well. And again, over here, there's even less of a motion. You don't even see 沉肩坠肘. But it is still, you still need to think about it, or shall I say, you need to put your intent on it. So your intent goes to the head, it goes to the shoulder, it goes to the elbow. So that you basically relax all the possible joints and muscles that you can. And once that's complete, then the physical aspect of Wuji stance is complete. But of course, when you're doing this, you're going to make mistakes, right? You know, like especially in the beginning, like you'll see that your waist is going to come back, and you're like, okay, my waist has come back. Let me bulge it out again. Then sometimes like your neck drop. You're like, okay, let me pull my neck back up again. And then sometimes you realize your chest sticking out. You're like, okay, I'm going to calculate my chest again. So it's constantly moderating what your body are doing. And that is why we believe doing Wuji stance is more efficient, or it is an easier approach than doing the form. Because when you're doing a form, you have to think about what motion to do next. And at the same time, you're kind of doing different motions. You have to check whether your chest is concave, whether your head is going up, whether your waist is bulged, whether your hip is expanded. And in every different motion, you're in a different position, so that your hips are actually at a different angle, your body's at a different angle, and makes it harder to do the right requirement or the principles than if you are stationary and you're just doing this. And if once you've done this, I'm not saying you should do this at home, but once someone like me who's done this, you then realize how hard it is to keep these principles just standing still. And then you can imagine how much harder it is to do these principles while moving in a form, which is why we believe that if you just come up and do the form, it'll become much harder to grasp these principles than if you're standing in stance. But of course, there are people who does it that way, and they get it that way. So this is not impossible or it's wrong. It's just, for us, we believe first doing everything while standing still and then attempt to move is an easy approach. Okay? You don't have to agree with it, this is just our belief. Now, once the physical aspects are done, then we talk about the more internal aspect, like 上下相随, right? The up and down, up and down in sync. I'll probably translate it to that. So over there, we basically will make minor adjustment to our skeletal joints, and then we'll basically try to connect the force from the waist down to the feet, when the feet comes back up to the spine, head, hand, and then the force goes back, down through the spine. So this is what I mean by internal motion, and it's something that you can't really see from a camera. Again, it's something that my mom had to come and feel to know if we are connected or if we're not connected. Now I'm just doing this here so that you can get a rough idea of what I'm talking about. You can't really copy this, unfortunately, just like everything else. And there's 内外相合, right? The harmony of in and out. Now that I can't show at all. There's not even a motion to it. It's purely trained through touch. And then from there, have 分虚实, differentiation of yin and yang, which I've covered in my video on the secret behind Tai Chi. So we're not going to talk about that here. And then it is, I think it's 动中求静, right? So in the original text of Yang Chengfu, he talks about 动中求静, which means you find stillness in motion. But obviously we are doing Wuji stance, we're really standing still, so it's opposite for us. It's 静中求动, right? So if you're doing a form, you're moving, but you have to find that stillness, the 10 principles, so that there's a constant thing that's unchanged while you are moving, right? That's what he means by 动中求静. And for us, it's opposite. We're trying to do 静中求动. So we are in this constant unchanged position. In here, we seek motion, which is what we call the internal motion, where the force will be traveled between the joints. So that is opposite. It's the same thing. It's just looking from two sides, two different spectrum, right? Whether you seek stillness in motion or you seek motion in stillness, they eventually reach the same understanding. Okay, and the next one is even harder to see, so I'm not even going to show it. It's basically once you have the internal connection, then you want to 相连不断, so you want to connect that constant, the up and downwards force, in and out force. It all happens simultaneously in a loop rather than going in one direction out and then stop in one direction back. It becomes a loop. That's what 相连不断 for us is referring to. And of course, 用意不用力. So that's we've already covered it. You don't use force, you don't use physical strength, you don't use muscles. You use your thought, your intent. But the intent has to alter the body. You can't just imagine completely, in a metaphysical state in your head, but your body is unchanged. It's not controlled by the intent. I've talked about this in my video on intent, right? If you're just imagining something, it doesn't count because you are not actually changing your body. So you have to make the intent change the body. So like, when I'm talking about broadening the waist, relax, expanding the hips, head going up, chest back, these all start in the intent, all start in the mind. I got to think about it, but then the body need to do what I'm thinking, but in such a way that I'm not stressing out the muscles to do it. It had to be guided by thought or intent rather than be guided by a physical action or guided by muscle. But it has to change nonetheless. If you're only thinking and you're not changing the body, you're wasting time, right? Nothing will be achieved in the end of the day. So this is the part that the master needs to come and test you to see if you are initiating these requirement or principles through intent, or you just physically doing it like with actual muscular tension or force, or are you actually thinking about it first and then gradually convincing your body to change in that way. It's a very subtle difference between using force and using intent. It's something that you can't describe, and you need someone to actually test you to see. So this is basically in a nutshell how we do Wuji stance. So I hope this has been interesting and helpful in some way, but like I said, don't expect to be able to train this just by watching a video. That's not possible. If you're really interested, you have to find a good master locally if you can. And if you can't, then you have to consider traveling with it, whether it's in the same country to a different province, state, or you have to travel to China or wherever. You have to make a plan. Learning from video is just not possible. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and again, thanks for everyone on my Patreon for your support. I hope you guys stay safe in this pandemic, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Keep well.